Yeah. I guess with all that in mind, you know, what you laid out there, and I mean, and also just to add, you mentioned how wonderfully AOC and the other squad members can fundraise. We also found out that she was so charitable that she was going to give a bunch of blue dogs $5,000, whether they wanted it or not, of those donations that people thought were going to be, you know, to fight for things like Medicare for all, like a Green New Deal, like a $15 minimum wage, like the abolishing of ICE, getting these children out of cages who haven't seen sunlight in days at times. Yet that all evaporated, right? And now it's, oh, I need to keep. I like it seemed like she would have almost donated $5,000 to Joe Crowley had she been in fucking a different borough. You know what I mean? Like, I'm serious.
Absolutely. Joe Crowley wasn't even the worst in terms of elected representatives. Yeah.
It felt like, I mean, obviously you're more seasoned and probably maybe saw this coming. It felt like a kick in the stomach. Like this was the final blow. Like, what? Especially when we talked to Eva Pitsova, who had a real fucking chance in the district, and yet her primary got a $5,000 gift from AOC. So really frustrating. And I guess in response to that, a lot of people have been sort of saying that the strategy of getting insurgent progressives into Congress has just failed. You know, I think it was actually on bad faith that Chris Hedges said that the squad had been completely emasculated. And I'm just wondering what you would say to people who have said, you know, fuck this, we need a new strategy because I'm not going to go knock on 1 million doors to get somebody into Congress that's going to fucking screw me in 6 months.
I don't blame them. I think it's a perfectly rational position to take. Look, my philosophy is, unlike the people who disagree with force of vote, I'm not in a position where I would try to get in anybody's way. I think on balance, would I prefer there be elected representatives who at least give lip service to Medicare for all than those who don't? Yes. You know, like, would I prefer there to be more people in Congress who co-sponsor the bills that I care about and inch us closer to getting majorities? Obviously. Do I think that inside strategy is sufficient? Absolutely not. And I think that having conversations about what your support of insurgent candidates is contingent on is important to make sure that those insurgent candidates actually keep their promises once they're in office. And there isn't this expectation that because we're better than the alternative, you're always going to donate to them and you're always going to support them, et cetera, and that having them there, not fighting for us, is better than not having them there at all. I think that's a trap that we can fall into, and I don't think that that's right, because even a progressive insurgent can be placed by a more progressive insurgent that will fight harder.
Would you support that? A lot of people are going to be super pissed off if somebody runs against AOC, and I support it. I've already said I don't give a shit. She's burned her bridge with me. I'm going to be honest. I don't expect much from her moving forward, and I would love to see somebody that I can expect much from get in and represent her district, but I understand that that's going to be extremely divisive.
Look, I think that AOC has said herself that I mean, it's some version of, I would rather be a one-term congresswoman than betray who I was when I started, right? And what I would hope is that if that were to happen, it would help course correct AOC. I mean, obviously she's enormously popular and anyone going up against her would face a real challenge. But I would hope that at least, a 2018 version of AOC would appreciate that as a wake-up call that could recenter her and help her, address the community that actually got her in office in the first place and make her a better candidate. It's like the people who, got all kind of squishy about Bernie Sanders tiptoeing around the idea of running against Barack Obama in 2012 symbolically. You can be mad at Bernie Sanders all day. You can say, oh my gosh, he's going up against the first Black president. Ye gods. But at the end of the day, at the time, Barack Obama was talking about cutting Social Security. And when Bernie Sanders was like, someone should run against him to prevent him from cutting Social Security, he stepped back. Right. And as progressives, I don't know how you could take the position that kind of a moment isn't a net positive for the progressive movement.
Well, I'm wondering, in a related kind of question, if there's anyone in specific that you kind of have your eye on as someone who could maybe carry on the political revolution of Bernie Sanders in 2024. And also, if you think that if they get screwed by the Democratic Party again, would you be at all supportive of the strategy of them then redeclaring as an independent after the primary is over? Basically what people kind of accused Tulsi Gabbard of doing or planning to do. And then obviously that never happened. But, you know, people even said that Bernie would maybe do that too.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked a lot about, I haven't written a lot of anything these days, but to the extent that I have been writing, I wrote last summer about this idea of litmus tests. And
yeah, one of my favorite
pieces.
You.
Thank you. And how if we aren't willing to draw a line in the sand at some point, if we aren't willing to say beyond this line, I will not go, if we're not willing to say, to have an off-ramp in the form of third parties, then we're never going to have sincere leverage in this country. I agree with all of my comrades at DSA and the broader left about how enormously important labor and the ability to withhold labor is. It's also true that we have the lowest labor density since the New Deal labor protections we got in the first instance. And that is harder to organize now than it ever has been. And that I don't think it's wrong to look in tandem to other ways to exert political leverage. And electoralism obviously has its limits, and vote withholding has its limits. But I think that that has been a really underexplored area, especially when you have kind of natural constituencies like the Black vote, who have had very, very few people talking about the power of withholding both labor and literal votes around issues that are very uniformly important in the community, as demonstrated by the protests last summer. I think that, I mean, it seems apparent that a condition of Bernie running as a Democrat and getting a certain kind of treatment as a Democrat was contingent on him not doing that. Yeah. And I wrote about this little in the litmus test piece. In the beginning of the campaign, Bernie was asked every time he went on TV, will you endorse the nominee? Now, everyone was asked a little bit. Bernie was asked to an obsessive degree. And it was clear that his ability to be in this race at all, as much as he was maligned and ignored and Bernie blacked out, you know, he had to, the condition of him being treated at all fairly was that he pledged that he would not break off and form his own party. Now, what barriers exist to him actually doing that or reneging on a promise? I don't really know. And I don't know what kind of personal considerations a man has, or what he hopes to achieve in terms of political capital, or whether or not, you know, having a leadership position in Congress is worth the trade-off of potentially starting that kind of a revolutionary moment in America. I am not learned enough a historian to opine, and that's why we have people on the show and I ask them these kinds of questions. And I'm like, well, what would happen, David Harvey, if Ro Khanna were replaced by Marx's brain? And what would Marx do from the inside if he were elected right now? What would happen if Bernie were to go rogue after the primary was over? Because I don't know. And I would like to be humble enough not to pretend to know the answers to those kinds of questions. But if we're not doing the thought experiment, we're potentially leaving a lot of cards on the table.